Meetups. It's always great to say hi to you all again in our Meetup program with English Department, Faculty of Cultural Sciences, Universitas Sebelas Maret in Solo. I'm not alone today because I have Miss Faye over here. Hello, Miss Faye. How are you today?
Hi, Pak Taufik. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah. And how is life at home with the family amidst the pandemic, Miss Faye? Okay, great hearing that. And also, Meetups, just keep in mind that the pandemic is still around. So, in this program, I will remind you to follow all the suggested health protocols amidst the pandemic, and let's help to protect our environment during this pandemic. Okay, so Miss Faye, thank you, for joining this program and also as the host of the program. So it is great that I'm not alone in holding this program, the Meetup program with English Department UNS.
Yeah. What do we have here in our background?
Right. So it is continuing the last week that actually I started already in a Meetup program that we bring the ICCoLLiC special edition, ICCoLLiC series,
What is ICCoLLiC again, Pak Taufik?
So ICCoLLiC is the conference held by the English Department. It is the international conference on communication, language, literature, and culture. It was the first ICCoLLiC.
Okay, great. So there will be the second, the third, and so on, right?
Right. We hope there will be more ICCoLLiC conference in the future. Of course, it will provide more rooms, for academicians, researchers, and also practitioners to share their expertise, knowledge, and research in the offered subjects.
Right, and it was held on the 8th to 9th of September.
Right.
And because of the COVID pandemic, right? So this conference has to be altered into a distance meeting that is run through.
Correct. Just like our program today, it was recorded on Zoom, and now we're following, also continuing using Zoom, to record our Meetup program. So, by the way, about the Meetup program, we need to remind our Meetuppers that the program can be accessed from our YouTube channel over here, below us. That's the link. And also through Anchor, that's Spotify. Right, that's the podcast. Okay, so who will be the speaker that will be shared in our program now, Miss Faye?
Right, so we actually have 7 plenary speakers, but
correct.
For this session, we'll bring Dr. Ida Kusuma Dewi SSMA. She is our English department, and she will talk about translation, which is very interesting. What is the topic actually here, Pak Taufik?
I guess it's related to the dialect, translating literary dialect, especially in really literary, and she talks about the problem and solution, because I believe it's not easy, right? Looking at the variation of language, that language is never flat. There are accents and then dialect. And I just realized that when it comes into translation, it must be not easy, because recognizing this unique, what do you call it? Accent,
but
dialect.
It is written, so it is something that we really need to imagine.
Right.
And the novel is also interesting. It's Mark Twain's novel, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn.
Right.
Everybody must have known this novel.
Okay, so I think without any further ado, we should let our Meetuppers to join and following the talks taken from the ICCoLLiC, the International Conference on Communication, Language, Literature, and Culture. Oh, by the way, so who was the moderator for this session, Ms. Faye?
Right, so we have Pak Bayu Budiharjo SSM Home. He is also one of the lecturers of English department, and he is now pursuing his doctoral degree in linguistics, especially translation in ONS.
Okay, so Meetuppers, let's enjoy the academic talk taken from the ICCoLLiC International Conference on Communication, Language, Literature, and Culture. So right now, in the ICCoLLiC series, the talk from Dr. Ida Kusuma Dewi, MA. Yeah, please enjoy.
Welcome to the first plenary session of the first International Conference on Communication, Language, Literature, and Culture. I am Bayu Putyarjo. I will be the moderator for this session. The next keynote speaker delivering the presentation is Dr. Ida Kusuma Dewi. She is a teaching staff at English Department, Sekolah Vokasi, and Postgraduate Program of Universitas Sebelas Maret. Her research interest is in translation, and her expertise is also in translation. And some of Dr. Ida Kusuma Dewi's works are articles published in journals and proceedings. Among the articles are strategi, teknik menerjemahkan, dan kualitas hasil terjemahan para penulis dan penerjemah buku bilingual untuk sekolah menengah pertama in jurnal penerjemahan, and then the characters background in the African American English dialect of the adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Should translation retain it? And then the development of model for translation on the plight in Directive Speech Act in Children's Stories. The other article is entitled Translating Literary Dialect, the Case of Transferring Ethnic and Social Backgrounds. And she is also author of many titles of books. Among the titles are Menulis dan Menerjemah Secara Efektif, and then Stairway 1, Stairway 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, buku pelajaran bahasa Inggris untuk SD dan SD. And then Passport to the World 1, Passport to the World 2, and Passport to the World 3, and then Active English 1 up to Active English 6. She also has some translation works. The first one is Career Aptitude and Selection Tests. Tes karir, bakat, dan seleksi. Ini teknik-teknik yang berpengaruh di ruang kelas. And then guru yang baik di setiap kelas. And how to make sales when you don't like selling. Now time is given to you, Dr. Ida Kusuma Dewi.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much for the members of the committee who have invited me to talk in this conference. It is really an honor for me to be here sharing parts of the results of my research. Okay, and thank you to Pak Bayu, the moderator, who has given me 30 minutes to talk here. Dear speakers and conference participants, today I'd like to talk about translating literary dialect, the problems and solutions. I think it is necessary for me to tell you that since I was a kid, I like guessing where someone is from by listening to the way he or she pronounces some words. And I will guess, are you from here or there? And it turned out that it is dialect. And now when I have grown up, I do some researches on dialects. So I am dealing with something that I like when I was a child. Okay. As the introduction, I'd like to invite you to see this picture. I think Indonesian people are familiar with the lady here, is Susi. And then as we can see in the two pictures, she wore two different clothes. This is informal situation and this is informal situation. Why I bring this picture? Because in my opinion, to some extent, the way language varies is in the similar way of how clothes varies. The variations of clothes and language can be based on the degree of formality or the context of situation. And the other side here, you can see many people wearing different kinds of clothes, and I believe that Indonesian people can guess some of the clothes, guessing where they are from or which area the clothes are presenting. Okay, and it means that the variations of language can be based on where someone is from. Where here can refer to the places or geographical background. Where can also refer to ethnic background and social background. In short, language variations can depend on the use, or it is generally called as register, and I think we who learn systemic functional linguistics will be very familiar with this. And language variation can be based on the user, representing where someone is from or where the speaker is from. And the last variation is something that I'm going to talk here. Okay, I divide my talk into some parts, and these are the parts. Now let's move on to the first part, dialect, and literary dialect. As I have mentioned earlier, dialect is a user-related variation of a language which is distinguished from other variations of the same language by its pronunciation, vocabulary, grammatical constructions, and syntax. Okay, right. For example, in Pacitan, people will say "jabang bayi" rather than "jabang bayi." Yeah. Okay, and then people in Banyumas will say "gandul" for kates here in Solo. It means that the dialect is distinguished by the vocabulary. My friends from Papua will say abri punya kita pakai rather than milik abri yang kita pakai. It means the syntax distinguished between the standard Indonesian language and the Papuan's dialect. Okay. Now, dialect reflects, as I told you earlier that dialects reflect regional or geographical, ethnic or national, social and also social backgrounds of the speakers. Okay. And then, what is literary dialect? Literary dialect refers to orthographies and misspellings, elisions, apostrophes, syntax changes, signs, etc., indicating dialect. It is usually found in written literary works. In spoken, it will be easy for us to recognize different pronunciation, but it is not in written form. That is why the features of phonology of a particular dialect are represented through orthographies of misspellings, as we can see in this example. I took the example from Mark Twain's novel. Your is written as Y-O, old as written as old, but actually they are not arbitrary, but they represent the phonological features of African American English. The deletion of R, the deletion of double consonant at the end of the word, which is represented by all here. Okay, and also don't also represent the deletion of double consonant. Okay, so the phonological features of African American English are represented through the orthographies, specific orthographies that you can see here that we call as literary dialect. Okay. Now let's move on to the next part, that is dialect and novel and novel translation. For novel writers, dialect can be multifunctional. It is a potent tool to assist novel writers to present the characters they have created to life. The speaker of the characters in the novel can sound natural because of the dialect. And dialect can also used by novel writer to demonstrate diverse way of speaking, indicating different geographical origins, cultural backgrounds, etc. And it is a tool for the novel writer to criticize class or ethnic differences or ethnic issues. And at the same time, it is usually also used to promote equality. So it means that dialects in literary works or in novels are chosen intentionally by the translators to fulfill their purposes. There are many purposes that they want to fulfill by using the dialect. Okay, now, but for the translator, dialect will create problems. As you can imagine, how can we transfer a place or geographical background when the language is changed? Because language and its variation represent where someone is from. When it is changed, so the identity where someone is from will be changed too. So that's why it is problematic for the translator, and then it also inspired me to do the research on this, because dialect and novel is considered to be one of the most challenging obstacles to overcome in literary translation. Okay, so I'm interested to know the problems experienced by the novel translators when dealing with dialects. And I will focus on how the Indonesian translators of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, written by Mark Twain, when they deal with African American English dialect in the utterances of black characters in the novel. Here are the sources of the data. So my data are information from 4 translators of 3 Indonesian translations of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn novel. The first version is Petualang Huckleberry Finn. It is the title of the Indonesian translation, which is translated by 2 translators. And I will refer the first translator of the first version as 1TV1. And then the second translator is referred as 2TV2. And then version 2, entitled The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, translated by Ambita Dianingrum, which I will refer as TV2, published in 2011. And the third one is Petualang Huckleberry Finn, translated by Pusi Sarmaya, published by Alex Media Koputindo in 2014. Actually, there are, as far as my experience is concerned, there are 4 translations in Indonesian language, but the first one is very also I didn't include in my research. Okay, now why I'd like to tell the reasons why I choose the translators of of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Because The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn is rich with dialect. And then the novel is phenomenal. And in the introduction, Mark Twain even states clearly, explicitly, that it contains a number of dialects, as we can see here. In this book, a number of dialects are used, blah, blah, blah. So I think it is a good source of data when I want to analyze translation strategies related to dialect. Okay, and then why African American English only, considering that there are some dialects in the novel? Besides to make me to focus on something, there are some other reasons, because the first one is that the African American dialect occurs frequently. my previous research showed that there are 409 sentences uttered by the black characters containing African American English features. And in the 409 sentences, there are about 2,000 words which are written in non-standard spellings. Okay. And then the African American dialect influences the characterization. That's another reason why I choose this the African American dialect. The features show the geographical, ethnical, social status, and even different intensity of contact with white characters, which is very interesting. And I think Twin has shown that he picked the features very carefully because they meet the features of real African American English. Okay, this is the example. Yeah, the first sentence is uttered by Judge Thatcher. He is white from high social status, is a judge. And the second one is the sentence uttered by Jack, a character, and he is not educated, and he worked for a mayor. Okay. Now, the findings. After interviewing, okay, I need to tell as well here that to gain the data, I interviewed 3 translators directly, but I only sent questionnaire to 1 translator because she was not available to be interviewed, and I have to appreciate her decision, but still, alhamdulillah, I can get the data from her. Okay, I can group the problems into 2 groups, 2 big groups. The problems in the analysis stage, and the second one are the problems in transfer stage. In the analysis stage, the translator found it difficult to understand utterances by black characters because of the large number of words written in non-standard spellings. And the strategies they took, there are 2 types. The first one is they read aloud the black characters utterances and guessing what the non-standard spelling words really represent, and then they guess the meaning. And the second one is reading the novel translation published before she translated the novel. The first strategy was done by the translators of the first person and also the translators of the translator of the third person, while the second strategy was done by the translators of the translator of the second person. She said that because she found it difficult to understand, she could not find it in the dictionary, and finally she tried to find if there is a translation has been published in Indonesian language, and she used the translation as a dictionary, something like that. Okay, right. And she read the first person's translation. Yeah, okay. Now, another problem and strategies in the analysis stage is understanding the roles of the African American English dialect. There are some roles, as you can see here, but there are some of them. They are based on my previous research that there are some roles of the African American English dialect, but what the translator could recognize are only the roles of the African American dialect of showing different group of society background, showing ethnic background, and showing low social status, and showing marginalized group of society. While the role of dialect of showing the geographical background and showing the different intensity of contact between the black characters with the white characters could not be recognized by the translator. And something interesting is that the translator of version 3 didn't know or was not familiar with African American English because she was majoring in Germany, but not for the translators of two other versions. They learned English when they were in a university, so they knew a bit about African American English. So they knew what dialect it is, but not the translator of the third version. What the translator of the third version knew was that the black characters spoke in informal English or non-standard English, but she didn't specify which variety it is. Okay, so I can say that the less familiar the translator with the dialect, the lesser number of roles they can detect. As we can see here, that the translator of version 3 only know that the black characters are different from white characters, but she didn't specify what makes them different. So the strategies they take when to know the roles was learning from the plot, learning from the standard spellings word, and recalling previous knowledge about the novel and the African American English dialect they have known before. It is it is applied by translators of version 1 and version 2. Now let's move on to some information about the dialect features. My previous research on African American English features showed that there are 16 types of features with more than 1,000, almost 2,000 occurrence. And then features of syntax 26 and features of vocabulary 2 types. They are types, not the occurrence, but for this one, I think about 500 or 600 times. Yeah, okay. So they are the phonological features. Yeah, so what I'm trying to explain here is that the non-standard spellings actually represent the features of the phonological features of African American English. They are not arbitrary. Okay, right. And then this is the example of syntactic features. Actually, there are 26, but I can present only 6 here. Yeah, so they are also written intentionally to show particular feature of African American English. Okay, now let's move on to the problems and strategies in the transfer stage. All translators found it difficult when they had to decide whether or not the unique way of speaking of the black characters should be transferred by the translators. And then, interestingly, only the translators of the first person who finally decided to transfer the unique way of speaking of the black characters, but translator 1 and 2 neutralized the dialect using standard Indonesian language. Okay, this is the example of the translation of translators 2 and translators 3. Ini ayahmu yang tua belum tahu apa yang dilakukannya. Ayahmu belum tahu apa yang dilakukannya. No indication of non-standard spellings as we frequently see on the source text. Okay, now another problem is encountered by the translator of the first person because they found it difficult to find Indonesian variation which can represent the black characters' background, that they are from a particular ethnic, that they are from low level of society, and finally they chose speech defects. We call it in Indonesian language cadel, a person who cannot pronounce R properly. Yeah, as we can see here. Menurutku, hayam adalah sebuah rumah kontrakan. Yeah. It should be menurutku, harem adalah sebuah rumah kontrakan. Yeah. So the black characters in the first person translation are represented as people who could not pronounce particular consonants properly. Yeah, we call it speech, Berezovsky call it as speech defect. Yeah. Okay. And then another problem occur in the translation because of the decision. But decision result in character shift. All of the decisions of the three translators result in character shift. And then the decisions result in translation that are difficult to understand, especially the decision taken by translators of version 1. Okay. This is the distribution, yeah. And another problem in translation version 1 is that translation that are not consistent in representing the speech of the characters. It is important for me to point out here that in the beginning of the chapter, Jack, one of the black characters, speaks in standard Indonesian language. But later on chapter 8, Jack speaks as if he could not pronounce R properly. So there are inconsistencies in representing the black characters. Okay, now I would move to the conclusions and suggestion. For a better translation result, I would suggest some strategies. So the problem in understanding the black character, to solve the problem of understanding the black character's utterances, the translator can read easy reading version of the novel provided online. Okay, I have searched for about 2 months and finally I found a easy reading version of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. It helped me a lot in understanding the utterances of the black characters. And translators can also listen to audiobook of African of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn novel. And another thing is that getting better acquainted with the African American English features. This is the example of the easy reading literature. Yeah, as we can see, the original text still presents the non-standard spelling words, but in the modern text, we can see standard English. Yeah, but it is not advised to read only the modern text, but to understand. It is used to understand the utterances much more easily. Yeah, okay. And then suggestion for the problem of understanding the rules of the African American English novel. It would be better for the translators to read references about the use of language variation, especially African American English dialect in the novel, and getting better acquainted with the African American English features. And the last strategy here, I believe, will solve the problem of understanding the rules and also the problem of understanding the utterances. As far as my experience is concerned, when I know the features of African American English better, I could read the black characters much better. Yeah. Okay, right. And then the problem of finding Indonesian language variation to transform the roles of the African American English dialect can be solved by transforming the backgrounds that have equivalent in Indonesian culture. Transferring the geographical background will not be able to be done when it is translation from English into Indonesian, because the background of the black characters that they are from certain part of United States can only be presented by African American English, yeah, and it cannot be transferred into Indonesian language. But considering that the African American English is also used to portray the social level background of the black characters, I believe the low level of society in Indonesia, people from the low level of society also have particular features of Indonesian language, which can represent the social level background of the black character. So, okay, and then getting better acquainted with the use of dialects in Indonesian literature is also necessary for the translator to be able to choose, let's say, the effective dialect that can represent the Black characters background. Okay, and I mentioned here the examples of novels using various dialects. Rai Sunyi by Asma Nadia, it is a very good novel. There are Betawi dialect, Western Java dialect, and Banyumas dialect in this novel, and I think it is similar to the Adventures of Baglo Brivin. Lalu nanti kita cerita tentang hari ini also uses different dialect in terms of different social level. Okay, and then about the inconsistencies, the translator can use trans tool when translating, because trans tool can keep the word, and then when it is needed, it can emerge automatically. And also making list of non-standard words or spelling, so that there won't be any inconsistencies any longer. Okay, the last one. Okay, conclusion. So African American English literary dialect in Mark Twain's novel The Adventure of Baglo Brivin, that the African American English literary dialect in Mark Twain is problematic is proven in this research. That's what I wanted to write actually. The problems can lie in the analysis stage and of the text and the transfer, and then better knowledge of the translators about the characteristics of the dialects, the use of the suspect dialects in the suspect literary tradition, the target language dialects in the target language literary traditions, and the techniques for translating dialects will enable them to solve the problems better. The last point brings me to the end of my talk. Thank you very much for the attention. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ida Kusuma Dewi.
So that's the talk. What do you think, Meetuppers? Pak Taufik? You like it?
Well, it is interesting, yeah, to talk language, especially from the literary products, and then it is translated while they are like a different way of speaking from the characters, yeah, from the dialogue of the novel, and especially looking at the American society, that it is not a single identity.
True. I also just found out that like we have different characterizations, different what's it called, considerations when translating dialect.
Right. Yeah. Because when we just transfer the meaning, it might not be clear or visible the identity of the speaker. So it might be so much different with the real condition provided from the original source text of the language, right? When we just transfer the meaning, well, actually it is like a different dialect or even like an accent that represent the community or the identity of the character. Well, it's interesting. Jet complex. Thank you.
Yeah, it's good that the translators, they have this freedom to really translate the dialect. Not only the dialect, but there are so many things to consider.
Right. Yeah, I think this is also a good consideration and reminder for translator when they do like the translation activities, that they might consider that, hey, there is dialect, that they need to pay attention in translating a certain literary product. Okay.
Okay, so this is the end of the ICCoLLiC series in Meetup Special Edition program.
Okay, and
So I'll see you again next week.
bye.
Bye-bye.